For years, she had believed that faith meant holding on, even when life became painful. Whenever something went wrong, she prayed. Whenever fear entered her heart, she opened her Bible and reminded herself that God had not forgotten her. She believed that every difficult season had a purpose, even if she could not understand it. Her hope was beginning to feel like a candle burning at the end of its wick. She still believed in God, but deep inside, she was tired. She was tired of praying the same prayers, tired of hoping for doors to open. Most of all, she was tired of pretending that she was not afraid. One rainy evening, she sat alone beside the window. The room was dim. The only light came from a small lamp beside her chair. Outside, rain covered the streets, and the sound of water against the glass filled the silence. She held an old cup of tea between her hands, but it had already gone cold. Her eyes slowly moved toward the Bible, resting on the table. For several minutes, she simply stared at it. Then tears appeared in her eyes. "God," she whispered, "I have prayed for so long." Her voice broke. "Why haven't you answered me?" She lowered her head. "I don't know what else to do." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I don't know how much longer I can keep believing when nothing changes." Her life had not always been this difficult. There had been a time when she woke up with excitement about the future. She had dreams. She had plans. She believed that if she worked hard, prayed faithfully, and trusted God, everything would eventually fall into place. But life had taken unexpected turns. People she loved had walked away. Dreams she had spent years building had collapsed. Opportunities she had prayed for disappeared without explanation. There were nights when she cried quietly so nobody would hear. There were mornings when she smiled at people, even though she had barely slept. She kept telling everyone, "I'm okay." But she wasn't, and God seemed silent. That evening, something inside her finally broke. She looked toward the Bible again. "I don't want to be angry with you," she whispered. She wiped her tears. "But I'm tired." She stood up and walked away from the window. She needed something to do, anything that would keep her mind from returning to the same painful questions. She entered an old storage room at the back of the house. It was filled with dusty boxes and forgotten belongings. She began moving things from one shelf to another. She wasn't really cleaning. She was simply trying to escape her thoughts. Then something caught her attention. A small wooden box sat behind several old boxes. She slowly pulled it forward. Dust covered its lid. She stared at it for a moment. She had not seen it in years. She sat on the floor and opened the box. Inside were pieces of her childhood. Old photographs, birthday cards, little drawings, a faded ribbon, a few handwritten notes. She smiled through her sadness as she touched the photographs. There was something comforting about seeing those old memories. Back then, life had seemed simple. She continued searching through the box. Then her fingers touched an envelope. She pulled it out. It was yellow with age. Her eyes immediately recognized the handwriting. Her grandmother? She had not seen that handwriting in years. Her grandmother had passed away long ago. She held the envelope carefully almost afraid that the old paper might tear. Why had her grandmother written to her, and why had she never seen the letter before? She sat completely still. For some reason, her heart was beating faster. Slowly, she opened the envelope. Inside was one folded sheet of paper. She unfolded it carefully. The first line read, "My dear child, if you are reading this, there is a chance that you are hurting." She stopped. Her eyes filled with tears. She continued, "Perhaps you are angry with God. Perhaps you have prayed for something for a very long time and nothing has happened." Her breathing became uneven. She looked around the room. It felt impossible. How could her grandmother have known? Those were exactly the thoughts she had been carrying. She continued reading. "I want you to know something. I learned only after many years of walking with God." Her grandmother wrote about her own difficult seasons. There had been times when she had prayed and heard nothing. Times when she had asked God for direction, but saw only confusion. Times when she had cried and wondered if heaven had become silent. Then came the words that made her stop completely. Silence does not mean absence. She read the sentence again and again. Something moved inside her. She had been measuring God's presence by what she could see. No answer meant God was absent. A closed door meant God had said no. A delay meant God had forgotten her. But what if she had been wrong? The letter continued. "There were prayers I thought God had ignored. Years later, I discovered that He had been answering them in ways I could not understand at the time." She wiped her eyes and kept reading. "You may not see the whole picture. You may only see the closed door. You may only feel the waiting. But God sees what you cannot." Her hands began trembling. She thought about every door that had closed in her life, every opportunity she had cried over, every prayer she believed had been ignored. Maybe those closed doors had not been the end. Maybe they had protected her from something she could not see. Maybe the waiting had been preparing her for something she was not ready to receive. Then she reached the final paragraph. If you ever reach the point where you want to give up, hold on for one more day. She stopped breathing for a moment. Then she read the next sentence. "Not because you are strong, but because God is faithful, even when you cannot feel Him." Her tears fell freely now. She continued until she reached the final words. "Please, don't make a permanent decision during a temporary season of pain." The letter slipped from her hands. She covered her face and began to cry. She cried harder than she had cried in months. She cried for every night she had felt alone. She cried for every prayer she thought had disappeared. She cried because she had almost walked away from the very God she had been asking to save her. She pressed the letter against her heart. "How did you know?" she whispered. Of course, her grandmother could not answer, but somehow the letter felt like an answer. Not an answer to every question, not an explanation for every painful event, but an answer to the one question that mattered most. Was she alone? Maybe not. That night, she placed the letter beside her bed. She barely slept. Her grandmother's words kept returning to her mind. Silence does not mean absence. One more day, Don't give up. Before sunrise, she got out of bed. The house was completely quiet. She walked toward the window and watched the darkness slowly fade. For the first time in months, she knelt down to pray without trying to find the perfect words. She simply whispered, "God, I don't understand." Her voice trembled. "I don't know why these things happened." She wiped her eyes. "I don't know when anything will change." Then she took a deep breath. "But I'm still here." She closed her eyes. "Please help me stay." Nothing dramatic happened. There was no sudden voice from heaven. No miracle appeared in front of her. The rain outside did not stop because she prayed. Her problems were still waiting for her, but something inside her had changed. She realized that she had been asking God to give her enough strength for the entire future. Maybe she only needed enough strength for today. So she decided to stop worrying about tomorrow. She would take one day at a time, one prayer at a time, one step at a time. Her faith did not suddenly become perfect. She still had questions. She still had moments of fear. But she had stopped running from God because of those questions. Instead, she began bringing those questions to Him. The following weeks were not easy. Some mornings, she woke up feeling hopeful. Other mornings, sadness returned before she even left her bed. Sometimes, she would look at the old letter and feel strong. Other times, she would wonder if she was, simply trying to convince herself to keep going. But slowly, she began noticing things she had ignored before. A friend called her unexpectedly on a difficult afternoon. Someone offered help when she needed it most. A small opportunity appeared after months of disappointment. One evening, she watched the sunset from her window and realized she had not cried that day. It seemed like such a small thing, but to her, it felt enormous. Healing was happening quietly. Months passed. One evening, she returned to the old storage room. The wooden box was still there. She took out her grandmother's letter. The paper was fragile now, but the words were still clear. She smiled. Then she took another sheet of paper. She wanted to write something of her own. She began, "My dear child, if you are reading this, maybe you are hurting. Maybe you are tired of waiting. Maybe you have prayed for something so many times that you are beginning to wonder if God can hear you." She paused. Then she continued, "I know how you feel because I almost gave up too." She wrote about the night she had cried beside the window. She wrote about the questions she had been afraid to ask. She wrote about the old letter she had discovered at exactly the moment she needed it. Then she wrote, "Please remember this. You don't have to understand everything to trust God. You don't have to feel strong every day. You don't have to pretend that you are not hurting. Cry if you need to. Rest if you are tired. Tell God the truth about your pain. But don't give up." She looked at the words for a long time. Then she added one final sentence. "Sometimes the answer is already moving toward you while you are still waiting." She folded her letter and placed it beside her grandmother's. 2 letters, 2 generations, 2 people who had experienced pain, doubt, waiting, and fear. She closed the wooden box That night, she knelt beside her bed again. But this time, she wasn't begging God to prove that He was there. She already believed He was. She whispered, "Thank you." A tear rolled down her cheek. "Thank you for not letting me give up." She looked at the old letter lying beside her Bible. She finally understood something she had been unable to understand for months. God had not promised her a life without storms. He had promised that she would never have to face them alone. And sometimes, when God seems silent, He is not doing nothing. Sometimes He is working beyond what human eyes can see. Sometimes He is preparing an answer before we even know what the answer will look like. And sometimes He leaves a message of hope in the past so it can reach us at the exact moment we are ready to give up. She turned off the light and closed her eyes. Her circumstances were not perfect. Her future was still uncertain. But her heart was no longer empty. She whispered one final prayer. "I don't know what tomorrow holds, God, but I trust you with tomorrow." And that night, she slept peacefully, not because every problem had disappeared, but because she finally understood that unanswered prayers were not proof of an absent God. The silence was not the end of her story. It was simply a chapter she had not yet learned to understand. And sometimes, the moment you think your faith is dying is the very moment God is teaching you how deeply you can trust Him.